Well, thanks again for being here this morning. We are finishing a 4-week series that we've been in over the course of the last month called Making Change. I have tag team taught this series with Pastor Craig Rochelle from Life Church. He has no idea. We just took the series from Life Church. They make all their resources available. And so we jumped on this, and he taught the first week and the third week. I taught the second week and the fourth week, and I am teaching the fourth week. And I hope that this has been a beneficial series for you, for those of you who have been around. For those of you who might not have been around, we've been talking about money for the last month. We don't talk about money a lot at Grasslands Church, but when we do, we have a very specific reason for doing that. It's not because we want more from you, but it's because we want more for you. We believe, Grasslands Church, that money is a gift from God. It is a stewardship, which means a management responsibility that we have in our relationship with God. And so if we're going to be people who are growing in our relationship with God, it's important for us to have a clear understanding and a clear perspective on money as God views money. Today, we're going to be wrapping up the series by talking about tomorrow. We've talked about a variety of things over the course of the last few weeks, and we're going to review those in just a moment. But I want to help you kind of frame things for today in terms of why this topic is so important for us. I believe that if we are to have a healthy relationship with God, we have to have a healthy relationship with money. Our mission as a church is to help people experience abundant life by finding God, forming healthy relationships, and fulfilling their potential. Most of you have probably heard that. You've been around Grasslands for any length of time. That is our mission, to help people experience abundant life by finding God, forming healthy relationships, and fulfilling their potential. Now, the abundant life that we're talking about is the abundant life that Jesus says he offers. He says, I came that you might have an abundant life. What a lot of people misunderstand is that when Jesus said he came to give us an abundant life, it wasn't about wealth and material abundance. It was about having a full and purposeful life. That's what the abundant life is that Jesus offers. And we will never experience the abundant life that Jesus offers until we step into a relationship with him and discover the purposes for which he has created us, to be able to use the time, the talent, the treasures that he's blessed us with to be a part of what he wants to do in and through our lives. Jesus talked about money a lot. In the New Testament of the Bible, if you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the first 4 books of the New Testament, you will see that Jesus talked about money more than any other topic. Jesus talked about money more than heaven. He talked about money more than hell. He talked about money more than marriage, more than sex. I mean, money was a hot topic. And there was a reason that Jesus talked about money a lot. Because Jesus understood that this inanimate object, this thing that we use in trade, which has no value and no power whatsoever except for the value and power that we decide to place on it, it can really be disruptive to the way that we manage our lives if we don't have a healthy perspective on it. In fact, the way that we manage our money not only affects our relationship with God, but you know it's true, it affects every other relationship that you have. The reason that Jesus talked about money was because money is something that we need, something that we're going to use, something that we're going to interact with and encounter on a daily basis, but it's important that we have a healthy perspective on the role that it plays in our lives. There's a verse in the book of 1 Timothy written by Paul, a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to his young protege, a young pastor named Timothy. And in this, in chapter 6, he says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, you've probably heard that verse before. I hear it misquoted all the time. People say, money is the root of all evil. No, money is not the root of all evil. That's not what Paul said. Paul said, the love of money is the root of all evil. See, it's all about priorities. And if you're a note taker, I want you to write this down. Failure to adequately prioritize money in our value system often leads to self-centered or self-destructive behavior. When it comes to money, it's not about how much you have or how much you don't have. It's all about where it fits into your own personal value system. In order to have a healthy relationship with money, and consequently healthy relationships in every other aspect of your life, you need to have an effective and appropriate prioritization of how money plays a part in your life experience. And so that's ultimately what we've been trying to accomplish over the course of this series, and what I'm hopefully going to help you land the plane on a little bit today as we wrap up the series. That having a healthy place of priority, a healthy place in our own personal value system is what's going to ultimately help us appreciate what God has blessed us with and manage what God has entrusted to us. So the first week of the series, Pastor Craig taught us that less is more. How many of you remember that? Less is more. He taught us that it is better to have one hand with tranquility, one handful with tranquility, than two hands with toil and a chasing after the wind. Right? It's better to have one hand with tranquility than two hands with toil and a chasing after the wind. Less is more. The second week of the series, I shared with you something that you already know. We just kind of jumped on it a little while, and that is that stress is bad. You remember that? Stress is bad. There's a verse that we looked at in the Bible that says that the borrower is slave to the lender. Now, I personally cannot imagine a more stressful way to live than to be somebody else's slave. When we are slave to something else or someone else, then we don't have the ability to make our own choices and make our own decisions and to live life the way that we feel like we ought to, because we're in bondage. We're chained up. The borrower is slave to the lender, and being in debt creates an incredible amount of stress. Last week, Pastor Craig taught us that giving is what? Giving is good. He reminded us that Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's more blessed to give than to receive. It's not that Jesus said it wasn't good to receive, because we all know that receiving is good. When someone blesses you, when someone gives something to you, it's good. He said that it's better. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And he challenged us to have a healthy perspective on what giving means in God's economy. That if we're going to plan to spend, and we might plan to save, we should also plan to give. That giving is an important part of having a healthy relationship with God. Today, we're going to be talking about tomorrow, because tomorrow matters. It's one thing for us to have the perspective on getting out of debt and not being slave to the lender. It's another thing for us to understand that giving is good, and we ought to be good stewards with what God has given to us and be people who are generous, be people who give. But also, tomorrow matters. It is important for us to have a plan to save, a plan to invest, not just for the earthly life that we're living, but for the eternal life that we'll have beyond this life. We live in what I would call today, I think you probably agree with me, I call it an on-demand culture. Do we live in an on-demand culture? Like my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, my generation was the first generation to grow up with a microwave oven in our house. My generation was the first generation to grow up with remote controls for our TV. My generation was the one that really made the drive-through window what it is today. We started it. I'll take full credit for it. The generation that is experiencing on-demand life today has a whole lot more than that, don't they? They've got TV on demand, groceries on demand, banking on demand. I mean, the millennial generation, many of them have never actually even stepped into a bank. They've never written a check. They tap, right? It's a totally different world. Everything is on demand. We've become such an on-demand culture that many people around the world are doing church on demand. In fact, I bet that some of you watching this video right now decided to sleep in this Sunday morning and are watching this video in your pajamas on your couch sometime later in the week, because you can do church on demand, right? We live in an on-demand culture. The downside to this on-demand culture is that it often causes us to overvalue the current and present moment and undervalue the future. We put too much emphasis and too much focus on what we can have now, or what we are doing now, or what we can experience now, and we don't value enough what might come later if we just had more patience and more persistence, more perseverance. We have a worldview that causes us to let now overshadow tomorrow. But tomorrow matters. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I shared with you some statistics about Canadians. And these are pretty mind-boggling statistics when we talk about our finances as a country, as a culture. More than half of all Canadians live paycheck to paycheck. More than half. I think that that's probably understated. Most people I know live paycheck to paycheck. You get the paycheck, and it's all spent by the time you get your next paycheck. Fewer than half of all Canadians save anything for the future. You can't save anything for the future. When you've spent all of your future earnings, you're in debt, which is why you're living paycheck to paycheck. Right? It's a really, really tough way to live. There's a 2014 CBC survey, and I've quoted this at Grasslands services before. But this is just mind-boggling to me. In 2014, they did a survey of over 1,000 Canadians, countrywide, nationwide, about their retirement plan. And their survey reported that 34% of those Canadians that they polled, when they asked them about their retirement plan, 34 people responded saying that their primary plan for retirement is to win the lottery. 34% of Canadians assume that they'll just win a lottery, and that'll take care of their retirement. Another 31% said their retirement plan was CPP. That's my plan. Every week, month, government takes a little bit out of my paycheck and they save it for me, right? In other words, you look at these statistics, that tells us that 65% of Canadians have no plan. Because the lottery is not a plan and CPP is not a plan. That's not a plan. We're talking about 65%. Almost 7 out of 10 Canadians have no plan for their future. Now, if that's you, which I would imagine is probably most of us, probably 7 out of 10 in this room have no plan. You're in good company, but it's bad company, right? You know what I mean? It's not a good place. It's not really where we want to be. Hopefully today, the things that I'm going to share with you will give you a little bit of perspective on how you can plan better for tomorrow and have a more godly perspective on what it means to plan and prepare for the future. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately personally. As many of you know, I've been working with my dad for the last few months, trying to help him get his affairs in order. He has Alzheimer's disease, and we know now that he is he's counting days. He's not going to have a whole lot more time here on planet Earth. And so we're working to try to figure out what the short-term and the long-term future is going to look like for him financially. And it's very regretful that my dad is living tomorrow, but he never had a plan for tomorrow. And so we're looking at what the costs of extended health care and assisted living, and all these other things that are going to be a reality for him over the course of the next few years. And because there was no plan, there really is no money. And I don't really know how we're going to manage it. His plan, like most Canadians, was, the government pension plan, Social Security in the States. Well, it's not a lot of money. It's not much there. And so it's very, very stressful looking at where we're headed and trying to figure out what that's going to look like. And so it's made me start thinking a lot about my plan, which as of right now is a non-existent plan. Elizabeth and I don't have a plan. We have saved some for the future. We have some investments. We have some RESP. I have a 401k in the States. But what we have there, it's just kind of lucky. We don't really have a plan. And I realize that as we have reached a stage in our life where we are on the back end of our working years, if we don't make a plan, there's a very good chance that our children could be sitting with us someday trying to sort out the same kind of problems and challenges that I'm trying to help my dad sort out. And so it's made me very, very aware of where I am, and I hope that what I've learned and what I've been studying, my perspective on this, will help you as well. For some of you, I know that your situation is challenging because you don't have a great paying job. Some of you got a bunch of kids. You're trying to manage a bunch of kids, and so household expenses are high. Some of you have struggled in your careers and in your businesses, and the economy here has not been helpful for a lot of people, and I realize that. But there are things that we can do now and a perspective that we can take that will help us plan better for our future. Tomorrow really does matter, and if we want to have a better tomorrow, we might have to make some changes in the way that we live today. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to read a few Bible passages. Now, as I've read these and I studied them out, here's one thing that I've noted. There is a real tension in the Bible about saving money. There are Bible verses, proverbs that tell us saving for the future is wise. People who don't save for the future are fools. People who don't invest are foolish. That's truth. But then right out of Jesus' own mouth are statements where he says, why are you worrying so much about the future? Don't be greedy. Don't think so much about tomorrow. You need to focus on today. There's a tension here. And it's a tension that as I prepared this message, I tried to figure out how to walk this tightrope. How do we balance this? And what I realized is that there is a very fine line between being godly and being greedy. There's a very fine line between being godly and being greedy. Now, some of you might not believe in God. You might not follow God. You might not have a God perspective at all, and you don't really care to be godly. But even if you don't care to be godly, I know you don't want to be labeled greedy. Nobody does. I've never met a person who says, I want to be known as greedy. Put that on my tombstone. Greedy. Nobody wants to be known as greedy. Even if your plan is not to be godly, you want to at least be known as generous, as benevolent, as kind, right? And so there's a real fine line that we walk here when we start thinking about the future and our plans for the future and how we balance enough versus not enough. Enough versus too much. So let's determine today how we can plan to walk with God through this journey, see God's perspective from the text in the Bible, come up with a plan that helps us grow in our godliness. That's ultimately what we're here for, right? We want to grow in our godliness. We want to be more like who God has designed us to be, which is a reflection of his Son, Jesus. I've got a few visual images for you that I want to share. I'm a visual learner, so as I was processing this, I came up with a visual that I thought might be helpful for you as you navigate your way through finances and planning for the future. When we talk about money, oftentimes people will use the phrase, I'm having trouble keeping my head above water. You ever heard something like that? Our head is above water, our head is below water. Now, this visual clearly indicates that a person who is in debt is going to have a very, very difficult time keeping their head above water, right? Because they've got debts like weights strapped around their ankles, pulling them down underneath the waterline. This is a terrible way to live. Most of you, if you're living this way, you know it's a terrible way to live. No one wants to live this way. Now, if we are able to free ourselves from the debt, which I know some of you have been working on, some of you have accomplished, then we move into a stage where we're kind of like swimming, right? Now we can keep our head above water. But the challenge in this particular stage is that in order to keep our head above water, what do we have to keep doing? What? Swimming, kicking, flapping those arms. You got to tread water, you got to go somewhere. If you stop, what happens? You sink, right? So while this is far better than living with the debt strapped around us, pulling us under, this is also a very challenging way to live. Now, if you follow Dave Ramsey's principles, one of the first things that he says is you ought to have an emergency fund. Have a little bit of a savings. Having a little bit of a savings is kind of like having floaties around your arms. Right? Any of you ever used floaties? Some of you have kids and you probably put the floaties on your kids. You know what? The good thing about floaties is you strap them on your arms and you will stay above the water. It will keep you from sinking. The problem with floaties is that they're not very comfortable and it's impossible to swim in floaties. How many of you watched a kid in a pool with floaties on their arms trying to swim? Right? You can't go anywhere. While you might be able to keep your head above water, there's still not a lot of freedom there. You can't really go where you want to go and where you need to go. You're not going to sink, and you don't have to constantly be paddling, but there is a certain truth about the fact that you still lack mobility. The next picture that we can look at is the person who has a big fat nest egg for themselves. Somebody who has saved a lot. Somebody who's so comfortable that they don't have to worry about their money from week to week or month to month. They're floating on top of their nice little raft, drink with an umbrella, nice and comfortable. Now, this is a place that I think many of us think that we would like to be. But this isn't necessarily always the best place to be either, because what happens is when we get completely out of the water and we're no longer worried or concerned or focused on our finances, there are things that often come up out of the water and attack us when we had no idea that they were there at all. We're not paying attention, we end up getting chewed up and spit out. We never know what's coming, which is why Jesus says, don't worry so much about tomorrow. Today has enough troubles of its own. What we need to do is learn how to find a place where there's a middle ground, a place where we can be above the water, but still have a clear perspective on the realities of working and earning, getting our money to work for us as we work for our money, and having a healthy balance here. Being godly instead of being greedy. That's the ultimate goal. I hope those visual images help you. It's helped me. I like cartoons. I'm going to read a passage to you from Luke chapter 12. Now, this is a parable that Jesus taught. Parables were they're like fiction stories, like a fable. It's a story that Jesus told that has a moral lesson to it. This is found in Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 16. Jesus says, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?'" Now, the word used for rich in this text, Jesus uses the word twice. The Greek word actually has two different meanings. One actually means literally, monetarily wealthy. This man was a rich man. That's how the parable starts. Jesus concludes the parable by saying that this man was in trouble, was condemned because he wasn't rich toward God. Kind of fun what Jesus does here. Because when Jesus says you're not rich towards God, it doesn't necessarily mean giving all this money to God, giving all the material wealth to God. It simply means being a blessing. This word rich can mean having lots of money. It can also mean being a blessing towards someone. And that's what Jesus is ultimately getting here. This man decided he was going to take life easy. Is that the ultimate goal? Is that why we plan for tomorrow? So that we can take it easy? I've got this date that I want to retire, and when I hit that date of retirement, I'm just going to take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Is that the ultimate goal? Is that what God is leading us towards? Is that godly? Or is that greedy? You know, this man was a rich man to begin with, and God blessed him even more. There was nothing wrong with him being rich. The problem was with his perspective and the value that he placed on what God had blessed him with. You know, imagine if the man had said something like this. What if he had said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, I'm going to invite all my neighbors over and prepare them a great meal." What if he said, I'm going to say to myself, I'm going to go on a mission trip, and I'm going to bless other people with some of the blessings that God has given to me? What if he said, you know what, I'm going to take the lessons that I've learned about farming and about building storehouses, and I'm going to teach them to other people in my community because I'm blessed, and I now have the time and the bandwidth to do this because I'm set for life. The story would have been completely different. And I think that's ultimately the lesson that Jesus wants us to learn. The problem was not with the man's wealth. The problem was not that he had wealth. God gave him the wealth. He was wealthy because he had a great harvest. What does a man do to have a great harvest? Hope he prays a lot. Because without the sun and the rain that God provides, there is no harvest, right? So everything this man had was a gift from God. It was a blessing from God. The problem wasn't that the man was rich. The problem was with the value that he placed on what God had given to him. If God is blessing you with material wealth, if God has blessed you, the reason that he's blessed you is so that you can bless him. And by blessing others, loving your neighbor, sharing with others, sharing your life, sharing your material blessings, that is a blessing to God. And this is that fine line, being godly versus being greedy. Now in the Proverbs, King Solomon, who was the wealthiest man who ever lived, has given us some insight into finances and into planning for the future. In Proverbs chapter 6, he says, "Take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter." Solomon says, look, the ants, they don't even have somebody telling them what to do. There's just a natural instinct. They understand that they need to make hay while the sun shines. They need to store up for leaner times to come. There is wisdom in saving. Proverbs 21:20, Solomon says that the wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. Fools live paycheck to paycheck. Wise people save. Wise people plan. Again, question is, are we being godly or are we being greedy? Living paycheck to paycheck, I think it's crystal clear, is not a godly way to live. Now, you're thinking to yourself, as I might be thinking to myself, as I have been thinking to myself a lot lately, if I'm going to save, if I'm going to have a plan for the future, I got to figure out how to maximize my earning potential. I need more money. Anybody need more money? I need more money. Put your hands up if you need more money. Okay, most of us here. We need more money. We could use more money. And there's two ways that we can earn more money. We can either work for more money, or we can put our money to work for us. Make sense? You don't have a job? Go get a job. It's a good place to start. If you don't have a job that's paying you enough, get some help, get some training, get somebody to help you with a resume, find something that pays better. We all probably work pretty hard for what we have. So the question then is, how do we make our money work for us? I'm going to give you some principles this morning on investing. And I'm going to give you a disclaimer that I am by no means an expert in investing. Okay, there's my disclaimer. But I'm going to give you some principles from the Bible, and I believe that since God invented the money, God's the expert, so we can take what he has to say to the bank. Literally, to the bank. First principle, don't invest in things you don't understand. Don't invest in things you don't understand. Proverbs 24, verses 3 to 4 says, a house is built by wisdom and becomes strong through good sense. Through knowledge, its rooms are filled with all sorts of precious riches and valuables. Don't invest in things you don't understand. Let me just validate the fact that I'm not an expert in these things. So recently, I've been trying to get caught up on some U.S. taxes that I have to file every year. As a U.S. citizen, I have to file taxes every year. Even though I live in Canada and my income is all in Canada, the U.S. requires that I still file a tax return. And they have these other forms and stuff that I have to fill out as well. And something has recently been brought to my attention that made me realize that I invested in something I didn't understand. About 13 years ago, 12 years ago or so, Silas and I were at this little festival in downtown Mississauga. It was a family event. Bob the Builder was there. We went to see Bob the Builder. And right next to the stage where Bob the Builder was on stage, there was a lady who had a booth set up who was selling RESPs, Education Savings Plans. And I went over and I talked to her for a few minutes, and I got her card, and I went home, and Elizabeth and I talked about it, and we phoned her up, and we set an appointment, and we started putting money into this RESP. We'd already had one for Sarah. We set one up for Silas, set one up for Ephraim, and we began putting money back every month so that we have this education savings plan. There's government grants and extra money and free money you get, whatever, and it earns interest. It's great. It's a great deal. And we've put a little bit of money back, and the upside is that when they graduate from high school, there will be some money for them to help them with their education. What I didn't understand was that because I am a U.S. citizen and my sons are U.S. citizens, that there are significant tax implications to an RESP. An RESP is considered a foreign trust to the U.S. government. Now I'm in a situation where I'm looking at having to pay fees and taxes on these RESPs that will pretty much completely undo every bit of investment that we've made over the course of the last 12 years. I invested in something I didn't understand. RESPs were a whole new concept to me. We don't have those in the United States of America. And I didn't ask enough questions, and I didn't read all the fine print. How many of you read all the fine print? I'm not a fine print reader. Some of you are. I should have had Ted read it before I signed anything, because Ted reads all the fine print. But I didn't. And the end result of that is because I've invested in something I didn't understand, I now have a problem that I have to figure out how to fix, and it's going to cost me money. Not a wise thing to do. Okay? Strike one for Bart. Second principle, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Ecclesiastes 11:2. This is in the Bible. Divide your investments among many places. Divide your investments among many places, for you do not know what risks might lie ahead. You want a little more evidence that I am not an expert in investments? I'll give you another one. So about 20 years or so ago, I was working in the corporate world. I was upwardly mobile, had a great job, was making so much money that even after I tithed every month, and I was given more than a tithe, I still had money left over, extra. Like I had an investment plan with my company and a retirement plan and had money coming out of my paycheck to go there, and I was given like 12, 13% of my gross income to my church, and I still had money left over at the end of the month. Overflow. It was awesome. One little window of my life where that's been a reality. So I decided as a 20-some-year-old guy, well, I need to invest. I should invest in the stock market because, well, never mind the fact that all of my peers, all of my colleagues were guys who were like MBAs and CPAs and CAs and CMAs, and I was a music student in college. I was going to do what all they were doing. And this was at the advent of the internet, and all these companies were coming out saying you can, for a very small fee, you can trade stocks online, set up your online trading. So that's what I did. And I dabbled a little bit, and I played around a little bit. It was kind of like gambling to me. I really didn't know what I was doing. I'll put a little money here, put a little money there. But then I got a stock tip. Number one, don't invest in things you don't understand. Number two, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But I got this stock tip, so I put all my eggs in this one basket. Stock that was valued at about $7 or $8 a share. And within about 6 months, it was like $27 a share. I am a genius. Brilliant. I made a ton of money. And then one day, picked up the newspaper, and this company that I'd never even heard of before was in the newspaper. And that's never a good sign. And they were filing for bankruptcy. And my stock, which I purchased around $7 to $8 a share, which had gone up to about $27 or $28 a share, was worth about 25 cents a share. All of my eggs, one basket. Basket hits the floor, you got nothing but a big mess. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. You can take that advice. That's King Solomon. That's not Bart. Third principle. Don't try to get rich quick. Don't try to get rich quick. Proverbs 13:11 says, wealth from get-rich-quick schemes quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows over time. Wealth from hard work grows over time. Warren Buffett, you might have heard of him. He's a billionaire. He's a guy who knows a lot about investing. He says, if you're not willing to invest in a company stock for 10 years, then don't even think about investing in it for 10 minutes. If you're not sure that you can invest in something for the long haul, then don't play around. Don't try to get rich quick. Money plus consistency plus time equals wealth. Money plus consistency plus time equals wealth. You don't have to have a lot. Whatever you have, whatever you can, you need to be consistent. You can start with $20 a month, start with $20 a month. If you can start with $200 a month, start with $200 a month. Okay? Money plus consistency plus time equals wealth. This is not an on-demand thing. Put the money in and lots comes out. No. This is why we have to value patience, value persistence, value consistency. Compound interest, according to Albert Einstein, is the eighth wonder of the world, isn't it? We all learned about compound interest when we were in the 7th grade. Most of us have never figured out how to leverage it to work for us. We've lived most of our lives paying off a mortgage, paying credit cards, paying car loans, where compound interest works against us. But it's time for us to smarten up and figure out how to get compound interest working in our favor. It's miraculous. It's amazing what it does. The goal is not to get rich. The goal is never to get rich, which is why get-rich-quick schemes are not what should be on your plans. The plan should be to grow in your godliness. And being prepared for the future and being wise with what God has entrusted to you, that is growing in your godliness. That will help you grow in your godliness. Tomorrow matters. We need to learn to invest, even if it's just small amounts, so that we can better prepare for our future. There will be a lot of tomorrows that we will live. There will be many, many more tomorrows we experience in eternity, beyond this life. And that's why it's important that we figure out this fine line between being godly and being greedy. I don't want to stand in front of God one day and him say, you were greedy. I want him to say, man, you took what I gave you and you invested. You were wise. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says this, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. At the end of the day, Jesus is more concerned about your heart than anything else. And that's why having our money in a proper place in our personal value system, having a healthy perspective on our money, is a great way to grow in our godliness. Jesus wants our heart. He wants all of our heart. Don't let your money or your lack of money ever consume you, take you out of the best laid plans that God has for your life. Jesus wants your heart, all of it. And we need to pray that God will give us wisdom in this area of our lives. I'm praying that God will continue to help me be wiser, be more prudent, and be more godly in managing my own personal finances. I don't want to be greedy. I want to grow in godliness. But I know that having a plan, because God is a plan, God is a God of order. God has always worked through plans. And we're hardwired to follow his leading in having plans in the way that we live our lives as well. Now, if you don't have a plan and you're not sure where to start, you can start by connecting with Dan at our Financial Peace University class Monday evenings. He had a first session last week. Second session will be tomorrow. If you missed 1 week, it's not too late to jump in, okay? Dan would love to have you there. He would love to help you through this. Dave Ramsey will help you get a plan to get out of debt if you need a plan to get out of debt. He will help you figure out how to save. And he will help you make a plan for tomorrow, because tomorrow matters.